So, hey, if you could tell us your name and your position over at Didi Hirsch Mental Health Services, and just kind of how did you get involved with the organization?
My name is Adia Fadaei, and I am 19 years old. I am a crisis and suicide counselor with 988 at Didi Hirsch Suicide Prevention Center in Los Angeles, California. And I got involved with the organization after being involved at Teen Line, a youth crisis and suicide hotline in high school, which then propelled me to move forward with 988 and with the Lifeline, kind of onto bigger things as an adult and outside of the peer support, the youth peer support arena.
Wow. I love that you were involved in these conversations in high school too, because it just shows how intuitive it is for you to really show up to individuals who are struggling with their mental health. And I think, first of all, that's so needed. We need more ideas in the world. It's just a really important cause to so many, especially to teens. So thanks for doing that work from such a young age. I know one question I'm curious about is kind of about the training that you all receive, or how do they prepare you for certain calls that you receive? And I'm sure that these calls are never easy, no matter how much training you get. And I'm sure practice helps a lot of responding to these. But how does Didi Hirsch or the other call centers prepare you for some of these, crisis calls?
That's a very valid question, and I think it's understandable that many people have worries concerning our training and what that might look like as crisis counselors. We receive extremely comprehensive training. My training was probably over the course of 3 months, and it was incredibly in-depth. But the training doesn't end there. Once you begin that initial training, you go through multiple other months of continued supervision, training alongside supervisors, alongside mental health professionals, alongside those who are really prominent in the community. And so, yes, it starts off with a interview process where you're kind of getting vetted to see why do you want to work here, and even asking questions such as what are your coping skills? How do you take care of yourselves? Asking other questions like, have you lost someone to suicide? If so, how recent was that? And are you able to cope from that? And are you able to move on in terms of at least being in a place where you've received comprehensive or adequate therapeutic services and or support in order to kind of move forward. So we do a lot of personal questioning, then we also do a lot of background information. And once we go through that training, we are pretty prepared with what we can expect on the hotline. Of course, every call is different, every caller is different. Everyone is incredibly unique, and so is every story, so is every experience. But we do dive into truly everything when we are training, and it is pretty comprehensive.
And how long have you been at the call center now, or how long have you been answering these types of calls?
Since I was about 14, I have been doing crisis and suicide calls as a hotline counselor. So this is going on my 6th year because I will be 20 this year. But with the Suicide Prevention Center for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, the Los Angeles 911 Diversion Hotline, Disaster Helpline, other helplines such as those, I've been with them for about a year now, a little over a year.
Wow. And how does handling those calls impact your mental health as the person on the receiving end of those?
Right.
Well, we receive an incredible and immense amount of support every time I am going on to a shift. I am met with overwhelming support from those I'm working with, alongside our supervisors. Our supervisors are constantly checking in with us, making sure that if I'm not okay to be on the call, if I haven't had the best week, the best day, that I will not be stepping into a space where I'm supposed to be helping someone else. And so that's really, really crucial. And then during the calls, we have breaks when needed if something becomes really activating, or we have a rescue call, something that might be a little more severe on the suicidality spectrum. We will take breaths, debrief, take some time, talk to our supervisors, and then we'll do kind of the same thing towards the end of our shift. And throughout the week, we just have to ensure that we're integrating self-care into our daily lives. So what that looks like for me is a lot of journaling, a lot of therapy, and with the training we receive, with the support we receive, it is doable. Of course, I don't want to negate the difficulty of it because it can be difficult and it can be really serious, and it is serious, but also we get so much out of it through what I can learn from a caller, what I can learn from my supervisors, that we are able to have like a healthy balance.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really amazing to hear the community that comes with being a crisis counselor, and that if you're not feeling 100% that day, that there's someone else who can either support you or support the callers that you're on. So I'm so grateful to hear that it is that kind of environment, because it's a lot to put on someone's shoulder to respond to these calls. And I know compassion fatigue is so real and can really impact your mental health from just hearing so many, just tragic crisis and difficult stories. One question that I think has been coming up for all of us, I think, we've been sharing about this 988 launch, and we're so excited that this is the new reality. And obviously, there is still work to be done to keep developing the 988 call line. But something I'd be curious to ask you is, what are some misconceptions that you've been seeing floating around the internet, and something that isn't factual? People are just sharing. Perhaps it's a misconception, or it's not being communicated properly or factually.
Lack of communication, misinformation, and misconceptions around this topic really break my heart, because they are so personal. They personally impact people, and they can hurt people ultimately. And so I have been really trying to counteract a lot of that misinformation, and a lot of us at 988 have been trying to do so alongside people in government, people with the nonprofit administrators that we have. One big misconception about the Lifeline is that we utilize geo-tracking services and that we are intertwined with police and law enforcement. This is completely false. You can verify this through our nation's Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration website, through the Federal Communications Commission. They recently had a forum about whether or not that would be implemented with geolocation, geo-tracking, and we have concluded at the moment that, and for the foreseeable future really, that that's not going to be the case. A big reason that 988 has even been implemented on a national scale is that we are really wanting to focus on community-centered mental health response. A lot of the calls that we are taking with 988 are actually done from diversion with 911. A lot of times people call into 911, they call in a mental health crisis. Someone might be having a panic attack. Someone might be struggling with passive morbid ideation, that part of the suicidality spectrum that doesn't necessarily mean that they are having suicidal behaviors and actions, but that they are thinking of dying by suicide and they want someone to talk to, and they're not knowing where they should go and who they should go to. They don't know the difference between 988 and 911. And so a lot of what we do is even take those calls that go to 911 quote unquote accidentally. Of course, nothing's an accident. We're so grateful anyone would reach out, but we're able to take those calls and do that work. So it is very unfortunate hearing misinformation surrounding this topic. I think what is so important in those moments is to really spotlight, which is why I'm so grateful you're having me here, but spotlighting the voices of people who are on the front lines, who are doing this work, who have the day-to-day experience, who know that we, for example, I'm based out of Los Angeles, and we serve a good majority of Southern California and really California at Didi Hirsch Suicide Prevention Center, and a lot of what we are doing is in combination with community mental health response, rather than law enforcement, rather than these, agencies that can potentially cause very traumatic experiences for individuals. A lot of what we do is give resource referrals to places that can support individuals a little bit better and a little bit more specifically to the crisis that they're having, rather than sending them off somewhere that may not necessarily be able to help them. So those misinformations and misconception can be very difficult to navigate, but I'm grateful that we're able to talk about it. I'm also grateful for the research that's being done and for the information that's out there, and I hope that people really tap into that through the Suicide Prevention Resource Center, through Didi Hirsch Suicide Prevention Center, through the Action Alliance Network, through all of these incredible people and corporations and nonprofits that are working to really put that messaging that's correct and factual and compassionate out there.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you so much for doing your part in that. And certainly a big part of wanting to have you on is to really clear up some of the stuff that we're seeing. Don't know if it's bad actors or why it's getting shared so much, but it would be terrible for people to not use the services that are becoming more and more available if they are in need.
Yeah, I'm just so grateful that you're able to clear this up because I'm also curious what does happen when someone calls in a situation. If you wanted to kind of walk someone through, and if they've never called before, what would happen if they chose to call that day?
Yeah, it's super important to acknowledge that every call is different, every caller is different, every call counselor you're going to get is different, although we
Right.
have a lot of similarities with the way that we do things, just for legal purposes, for caring for people, human purposes. But a lot of what will happen when someone calls in is we will introduce ourselves. So I might say, hi, my name is blank, and this is the 988 Crisis and Suicide Lifeline. What's your name? Someone might tell me their name. We might talk a little bit. We ask some questions for funding purposes. Again, we are a nonprofit and we are an administrator. So a lot of what we do at the Suicide Prevention Center is able to inform research and inform initiatives by the federal government in order to enact, better legislation and pour more funding into our network. So we do ask some funding questions, and also those questions can be used to understand the person better. So for example, if I'm talking to someone and they tell me that they are 87 years old versus someone who tells me that they're 13 years old, we can better kind of discuss resources that might be more specific to their age, to what they're dealing with at the time, better give resources that might be more specific and just more empathetic for them instead of, trying to throw something that might not be helpful. And then we'll talk a little bit. A big thing, a big portion of what we do at the Suicide Prevention Center when we are taking calls is we want to effectively risk assess. And so, like I kind of mentioned earlier, suicidality is a spectrum, and it really starts with what's considered passive morbid ideation and can go anywhere up to being an active and imminent suicidal crisis. And that's usually when we start talking about those words like rescue and those words like someone really being suicidal, having suicidal behaviors, having suicidal actions. So we have to really think about it as that spectrum, right? And a lot of what we do is try to figure out where someone is at through asking those important questions that are research informed, that are created by people who do this work on the front lines, who are suicidology experts, who have given us these guidelines in order to actively and effectively risk assess and understand where someone's at. And so that way we can meet someone where they're at. And then a lot of what we do is crisis de-escalation. A lot of times someone can call and they are in a panic attack and they are having difficulty with this, panic and ruminative flooding that is coming alongside their suicidal crisis. And we are able to just take some steps in order to calm down a little bit so that we can talk, so that I can actively listen. And then alongside that, we are providing emotional support, we're providing resources. What we hope to ultimately foster with the Lifeline is having that human connection, because what we see in the suicidal crisis and the suicidal narrative, when someone is affected by suicidality, which is so difficult, it is isolating, it's debilitating, it is characterized by this tunnel vision, it's characterized by one of the leading suicidologists in our field has this interpersonal psychological theory of suicidal behavior, Dr. Thomas Joyner. He's really incredible. I would really encourage anyone looking into it. But essentially, he talks about these different elements of the suicidal crisis: perceived burdensomeness, believing that you are a burden to society, believing that your life is actually burdening to others, and then thwarted belongingness, that lack of connection to self, to others, to communities, paired with, acquired capability, which is like access to lethal means. And that's a big reason of why what we do is reducing access to lethal means. And so all of these ways that we try to intervene are kind of predicated upon proactive, like preventative care, also intervention, and then postvention if needed. Sometimes we will do follow-up calls for those who have been rescued, and that will be with the consent of the person who's rescued, and making sure that we are following up, making sure that they are getting community resources.
Wow. No, it's so informative.
You're so brilliant. Like the way you speak about this topic, like I know for a fact that at 19, I was not speaking about mental health in the way that you're speaking about it. And I think, that's really, really amazing that you have so much knowledge and you really are delving so deep in this space.
Absolutely. So to anyone that hasn't called or texted the Suicide Lifeline before, and they're hesitant to do so, what would you say to that person?
Totally. Well, firstly, your hesitancy is valid. It's scary. Reaching out is so, so scary. Being vulnerable when you're characterized by shame. A lot of people who we talk to at the hotline have never shared with someone that they're suicidal, have never shared with someone that they were just recently diagnosed with, let's say, clinical anxiety. So we are able to really tap into that and really validate that. And I hope to validate that, and also maybe work alongside that and see how can we come alongside you, but also how can we make sure that you're getting ongoing support, right? Because a lot of what we do at the hotline is kind of can be that one-time crisis support. It doesn't mean that you can't call in more than once, just that we're not supposed to be we're not taking the place of, we're not replacing therapy, we're not replacing those long-term supports, we're not replacing medications or anything like that. If anything, we're coming alongside, we're supplementing, and we're trying to be complementary. But for anyone who is really thinking about calling, I would really, really encourage them to just call and to try reaching out. The hardest step a lot of times really is just, taking that phone, picking it up, putting in 988. Now it's a lot easier because you're putting in 3 digits rather than having that difficulty in accessibility, having to search on Google. A lot of times people are worried about what is it going to look like if I search National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number on this network or something like that. And so it really, the hardest part is sometimes picking up that phone, making that call. And from there, we really, really are open. We want to support you. We are not in the hopes of harming you in any way, shape, or form. We want to nurture you. We want to encourage you, and we want to validate you because you're so important. And that's why we're here. That's why I do what I do. That's why everyone does what they do in this space. Really, a lot of it has to do with lived experience, with personal experience, and really that ultimate true passion and care where we want to be here and we want to support.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Yeah. I'm so glad that we got a chance to be speaking with you, because just hearing from you, obviously I knew that there were so many kind, compassionate individuals on the other side, but I bet anyone listening to this would be like, wow, I would love to connect with Adia if I was in a moment of crisis, just knowing, how you would respond to them. This question might be a little bit more challenging. And again, this can be edited if you're feeling any type of way about it. But these comments that we keep seeing over and over again are connected to the police showing up. And I do understand that in a moment of intense crisis where the person's life is at risk, there is a chance that the police could be called to respond, especially in a crisis center that's in the middle of nowhere. They might not have as fleshed out of a call center as maybe Didi Hirsch does. I guess I'm wondering if you could speak on the individuals who are asking about the police showing up, and kind of when does that happen? When do the police get called? At what stage? And are they asked for consent? Like, can we call the police? Or is it, to save their life, we must call the police?
Totally. So many thoughts are coming out of that. Firstly, this is a really hard question. It's a hard question because it refers to difficult circumstances and vulnerable circumstances, potentially traumatic circumstances with hurtful consequences. And I know that we have a system that has, when I say a system, I'm not necessarily referring to the Lifeline. I'm just talking about the system that is ingrained within our nation's crisis care continuum. It's flawed. It's heavily deficient. It's heavily necessitating continual funding, continual support, continual research to be backing what we're doing, continual, diversion of crises to community-based responses. And I really validate that. I really see that, and we hear that, and I acknowledge that. What we ultimately want for every single person on the line is for their safety, to be supported. We want someone to be safe. When someone is calling into the hotline, especially when they are in suicidal crisis, there is an element of ambivalence that is inherent to the call that they make. It is the presupposition that they are asking for help in some way. And so what we really want to do is hold on to that in a way that is supporting them. And so, again, with suicidality as a spectrum, right? A lot of times people think the police are going to come and intervene and find me if I tell someone that I'm suicidal. That's actually not necessarily true at all. So the majority of calls we take, actually, I think about 98% of calls we take, whether they have, the majority of calls have, suicidal element to the story, to the caller's life, but we don't have interventions, we don't have rescues, voluntary or involuntary. And a lot of that is because with the legislation that we have, we cannot have someone come to, we cannot have police come to someone's house if someone is saying they're suicidal, but they don't have, a plan, they don't have means, they don't have access to the means, they don't have a timeline, they don't have prior attempts of suicide, all of these different aspects. So again, this is why we risk assess, right? But we also are mandated reporters. And so if someone is calling, it is really only if they are in imminent suicidal crisis. So an example of that is if someone has called in, this is a call that I have had something similar to, I can't say the specifics because of confidentiality, but a similar theme of a call that we have had is someone calling when they have overdosed already and they are asking for help. And so a lot of times people actually call because they want to potentially call 911, and they actually want to know if they think that we should do that, if they think that they deserve emergency services. And so sometimes they actually come in and have overdosed, and so they are looking for that support, and we might get that intervention with law enforcement or community-based mental health resources and responses. I would also mention, so out of that 2% of calls that do involve active rescues, I believe about half of them, which the Lifeline reports, about half of them are voluntary. And so that is really, really important to hold on to. There are many times when someone calls in and we actually necessitate an active rescue because they are in imminent suicidal crisis with a plan for tonight, with a plan for now, with lethal means and access to means and high levels of suicidality and suicidal action. And in those moments, a lot of times we stay on the phone with them as a friend comes and drives them to urgent care, or someone else who is in the house. Like a lot of times with youth calls, a parent who's in the house, we will hope for them to get involved in, if it's a safe situation, if it's, someone that is a support system for them who will not be providing that extra level of trauma. A lot of times a parent will come on the phone, will be going alongside them to get emergency services. So with a lot of these calls, when we talk about rescue, that does not necessarily mean at all that the police are going to come to someone's house. And sometimes that does happen, and we really, really need to figure out, because of that crisis care continuum, right? What we do at the Lifeline is we are restricted to an extent because we don't have those legal capabilities to be involved with the law enforcement process, to be involved with the mental health hospital process. So that's where we really, really, really need to strengthen those systems on national levels and on local levels. And that comes alongside with a lot of legislation, a lot of initiative, and a lot of that fancy stuff. But it is important to think about rescue in a way that is a little bit more nuanced. And it is also important that when we are talking about these things, that we are making sure that it is factual, that it is research informed, that we are going to credible sources, such as Vibrant Emotional Health, again, such as the Suicide Prevention Resource Center, such as SAMHSA, where we can really get those answers and have that sense of safety. But I don't want that to take away from anyone who is really wanting to call and who is really wanting to support, because the likelihood, again, is not very high that rescue would come into play like that.
Wow. Thank you so much for clarifying that. I think that's going to be very helpful for a lot of people that hear that.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing we've been hearing, where it's a tough thing to respond to because it's a really valid concern. And I could understand if they're seeing it being posted everywhere, why they would kind of come along. And yeah, I've just been seeing so many people responding with that. And I'm like, we should definitely find out if that's at all accurate. And it makes me feel a lot better knowing that it does only happen in very specific situations when there's an actual imminent risk to the person's life. So yeah, thanks for clearing that up for us.
Yeah. I get curious if someone's listening and they're super passionate as you are, as we all are, and actually want to get involved with their local crisis center. Do you have any information on kind of what they should do or kind of steps you took when you were younger and first getting involved?
Totally. I think I have two answers to that. One being that my way of getting involved was a little non-traditional in the sense that I heard about my youth crisis and suicide hotline, Teen Line, through a television show called Dance Moms. And that's a long story in itself. And that show is concerning in itself. But I did get involved in that way because I saw modeled in front of me peer-to-peer support that I'd never seen before, where youth were empowered to get involved with having that frontline support. So that was a little non-traditional, right? And then from there, I was able to get involved with Didi Hirsch Suicide Prevention Center, which I actually know through many different facets of life. I've learned about it. And it actually, fun fact, was the first suicide prevention center ever created. The founding members of the suicidology field, Dr. Norman Farborough and Dr. I might be messing that up in terms of the pronunciation, and Dr. Edwin Schneidman, they actually created the Suicide Prevention Center that is now Didi Hirsch Suicide Prevention Center, which is where suicidology really, really began and erupted. And so that's a fun fact. So that's a big way of how I even found out about Didi Hirsch, but also through connections with Teen Line. They have merged with Teen Line more recently, which is super exciting for me personally and just from a general community national level. But if someone really wants to get involved in a way that doesn't involve watching a reality show because it's random, they can look online, the 988 Lifeline website, and see how to get involved with their local crisis center. We have about 200 or so crisis centers across the country. California has, I believe, 12 or 13, with Didi Hirsch being our leading one, which is the one I am at. And what you can do is it's kind of like a map situation online where you go on 988 Lifeline, you kind of click the get involved or crisis centers, you put in your information. So for me, I would put in my zip code and it will show you what the local crisis center is. And a lot of positions right now are remote. So a lot of people, even if they have a lack of really good crisis centers or a close crisis center to them, they are potentially still able to get really involved. So I think that's really worth looking into if someone really, really wants to be involved, because with 988 and with increased funding, with increased awareness comes increased need, and we really need to meet that need.
Yeah. You know, we have this collection coming out in just 20 minutes with Didi Hirsch, where 100% of the profits will go back to Didi Hirsch and help fund some of these call centers. I'm wondering if you could envision kind of like a manifesto in an ideal world, kind of what would 988 evolve to? Like, what would be the vision for 988 if you could see it becoming something of like the best case scenario?
Totally. I think 988 is a lot bigger than 3 digits, right? It's a lot of things. It is our hotline system. It is our crisis care continuum. It is our symbol of hope in our communities. It is a lot of different things. It's awareness. And so with 988, I hope to see it branched out in many different forms. I hope to see it branched out in expanding and making our crisis care continuum more comprehensive, more equitable, more inclusive, and ultimately able to serve more people, all people, really. That's, my manifesto. Another part of 988 would be ensuring that we are being preventative and we are having interventions, postvention. I really am hoping for a lot of proactive mental health support, everyone knowing the number 988 and calling even before things escalate, just so that we can, it is really important that we intervene or that we have those proactive ways of supporting. I also hope that it will lead us to better media representation about suicidality. We see these psychological phenomena such as Werther effect and alongside suicidal contagion and cluster, all of these difficult concepts that ultimately mean the way that we portray suicide in media really, really can be detrimental to someone affected by suicidality. I hope to see more research for suicide. I hope that will be informing us, that we will not just be kind of trying to see what works out, because a lot of leading experts in the field are already doing that, are already really giving us that valuable information that we can change into tangible action. And I'm ultimately hoping that everyone will have treatment access, that everyone will be able to be supported. Again, idealistic, but we have to be founded on these foundational and crucial messages of hope. And we have to be looking towards more, because this is not the end in any way. 988 is a beginning or a next step, but it's not a final step in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, you brought up intervention, and that kind of brought up a question for me that I'm curious about. I wonder if, I'm sure other people are, but say in the case of bystander intervention, you're not the person going through, these suicidal thoughts or things like that, but there's someone you love that you suspect maybe. Can people call 988 for someone else, or how do you direct people in those kinds of situations?
I am so happy you would bring that up, because what a lot of people don't know about 988 is we have an innumerable amount of third-party callers. So we have people calling in all the time about someone else, calling in about their loved one. A lot of times we have someone calling in about their loved one who's in the room with them. They call in together. It's this really beautiful connection. Or sometimes they're calling in on behalf of someone else, and then the next call is the person who they gave the number to. So yes, 988 is not relegated to those who are in suicidal crisis. It really expands to people in mental health crisis, in substance use crisis, in suicidal crisis, and those who are concerned about those who are in crisis. And we are there to support them as well. That is a very specific circumstance. And so not only will we provide the support of kind of giving that psychoeducational information and helping someone with the risk assessment, all of that for their loved one, but we also will support the third party caller, check in with them. So yes, 988 is broad.
Wow, it's such an incredible resource.
I know.
And it's free. That's why it's so important that we get it funded and we get more people that care involved. We need this.
Yeah. I have one last question that's an expansion of a question we asked early on, but it's just coming up. You mentioned that geo-tracking is not, this is we're going way back to the earlier questions, but you mentioned that geo-tracking is not how the crisis calls get directed. How do the calls get connected to local crisis centers? I guess because they're not using geo-tracking, how do they know that they're located, let's say, in California or in Nebraska or wherever they're calling from?
So the way that it works with connections to crisis centers is you actually get connected to the crisis center that is local to your area code. A lot of times people's area code actually have no accuracy in terms of where they live. So for example, if I'm based in California, Los Angeles. And so if I were in New York right now and I called in, I would still be located to Didi Hirsch Suicide Prevention Center. So in that way, there's no geo-tracking. They would not be able to see that I'm in New York at the time, not in LA. That's kind of how it is. And there's a lot more information on that with what was recently kind of created with the forum with the Federal Communications Commission. So for more information, because I'm totally not an expert, but that is, my brief thing of it, is to look into that a little bit more.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I saw information about that on SAMHSA's website, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of clear it up for anyone who would be still wondering.
Yeah, I think that covers about everything. I mean, because we are Self-Care is for Everyone, and you're doing such incredible work at such a young age. I do get curious, what is your day-to-day self-care routine to kind of keep up with everything that you're taking on?
Totally. I kind of assumed this question would come. It's very innate to the brand, which I love. And my self-care is very, very deep-rooted and integrated in my daily routine. So I'm constantly checking in on myself. I'm maybe overly introspective. I don't know. I can talk to my therapist about that, but just kidding. I'm in mental health. I'm in Get Mental Health Services. I'm in therapy. I have an incredible communication with my therapist, and I'm able to do that regularly. I'm very grateful. I know not everyone has access to that, so I acknowledge that. A lot of what I do is disconnecting from my phone. I went 4 years. I think 4 is the accurate number. Yeah, I went 4 years without social media, so that was really great. Whole other convo, right? But these types of really healthy practices are just so important to be integrated in our daily lives, whether you take calls on the crisis lines or whether you have, a really, really stressful and hectic life for other reasons. We all need to be integrating self-care. So everything from that to establishing my happy places. I go to the ocean all the time. I'm kind of near the beach. And so that's really important to me, being around those I love, but also just taking time for myself, journaling. I just the other night canceled my plans to journal for 3 hours. And sometimes you just have to do that. So I'm not saying you should journal for 3 hours all the time. It's extensive, but sometimes you just have to. And so a lot of what comes with self-care is being so in tune with yourself that you change it around as you go and that you add it in when you need and maybe say, okay, I can do that a little later because I'm feeling okay right now.
Mm-hmm. I love it.
So impressive.
Yeah, I'm like very, very impressed by you and how much work you put into keep growing yourself so that you can show up for others in this space. And it's really obvious how much work you've put in. So thanks for everything you do.
I got curious since, you're still in your formative years, like what's your kind of goal or where do you see yourself in the next 5 to 10 years? Like what are you trying to get to?
Totally. So my goal in the next 5 years is to continue this work. Shocker. So continue this work in some capacity. My education goals are really centered on hopefully like doing a PsyD route with clinical psychology and getting my doctorate in that way. I just think that in this time where there's a lot of commercializing and crowding of the mental health space, it is very important we have people with the academic backing if they're going to be, speaking on these topics. And so that's just my personal thing. And so I really want to be having that academic backing. I also love school. I love learning about psychology. So that's one thing. I would love to further the world of suicide prevention. And so suicidology is a route I'm really wanting to take, clinician work, and ultimately a lot of advocacy. So individual conversations and individual advocacy paired with systemic advocacy. Again, I don't know what everything's going to look like right now, but I think what's most important is I just want to be taking care of myself, taking care of those around me, and to always be checking my heart and make sure my heart is postured towards, kindness, care, humility, and lots of love.
Oh. I love that so much.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, you're on the right path. You're on the right track for sure. And it's been such an honor to kind of hear your story and hear how much you've learned around these 4 years of working or 6 years. Is that what you said? I think you said 6 years.
I can't count. I'm a psychology person, not a math person. So.
That's amazing. Well, it's been really cool to learn more about this new 988 launch and to kind of hear how it's been impacting you.
Any last things you want to share that you feel like we didn't cover?
Oh, yeah.
Just thank you. I mean, there's really nothing else to say except thank you. As you obviously know, as I have shown you, I've been getting the sweaters for so long, and I've been really following Self-Cares for Everyone. I get the weekly emails. My close friend Zoe Kane is always creating art for you all. Yes. We actually met through the White House. And the organizations you work with, the work that you do, the people that you work with to put out your content they're all so special. I was even talking to, getting to talk to the photographer you had while they were at the Suicide Prevention Center, talking to your intern who's my age. We have mutual friends and we've hit it off. So it's just a special community. And when you've kind of been getting in this world a little more, as I have been in the past few years, you can really see whose heart is in it, and you can really see the communities that are inclusive and that are so caring. So I feel very supported by Self-Cares for Everyone, whether you knew me when I was getting the lavender, hoodie or now. I feel very grateful. I feel very, very grateful. And I think that everything you're doing is super impactful. I'm excited to continue seeing what you put out there. I'm always available for support, extra hands, whatever you need. But thank you. Thank you so much for chatting, being so kind.